In a quiet suburb outside Detroit, a man named Frank stands in front of his bathroom mirror. He adjusts his collar, smooths his thinning hair, and stares at his reflection. He doesn't recognize the man looking back. Frank is 74. He used to run a small auto shop. People came to him, not just for repairs, but for advice, for conversation, for trust. Now, the shop is gone. The building was torn down last year to make room for a vape store. Frank still wakes up early, still drunks his coffee black, still folds his newspaper the same way. But something's missing, not in his routine, but in his sense of self. You're a man who once knew exactly who you were. You were the father, the worker, the neighbor, the friend. You had a role. You had a name that meant something. Now you feel like a placeholder. Someone people pass by, nod at, but don't really see. You're not asking for attention. You're asking for recognition. You're a man who once made decisions that mattered. Now, you're asked what you want for dinner, and even that feels optional. You're a man who once gave advice that shaped lives. Now, people Google answers instead. You're a man who once defined yourself through action. Now, you're defined by age. In towns like Amarillo, Texas, or the quiet corners of Vermont, men sit on porches, not because they're tired, but because they don't know where else they belong. You walk into a room and no one asks your opinion. You offer a thought and people smile politely, then move on. You're not bitter. You're just wondering when you stopped mattering. I'm Silas Reed, and this is The Silent House. We speak to the men who've lived through decades, but whose identities have been slowly erased by time. We're here to listen, to understand, to remind you, you are still someone. If this message speaks to you or someone you know, support us. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, like this video, and leave a comment. Your story matters. Let's make silence heard. You're a man who still has values, still has beliefs, still has a way of seeing the world that's shaped by experience. But the world doesn't ask anymore. It just scrolls past. You're a man who still wants to contribute, not for praise, but for purpose. You're a man who still wants to be known, not for what you used to be, but for who you still are. In a small town in Pennsylvania, a man named George volunteers at the local library. He shelves books, helps kids find stories, but no one knows he once taught literature at a university. No one asks. No one sees the depth behind the quiet man with the cart. George doesn't mind the work. He minds the invisibility. You're a man who still has a name, but it's not spoken with the same weight anymore. You're a man who still has a voice, but it's not invited into conversations. You're a man who still has a soul, but the world treats you like a shadow. And that's what identity loss feels like. Not a crisis, not a breakdown, just a slow fading of relevance. You're not asking to be young again. You're asking to be seen again. You're not asking to be praised. You're asking to be acknowledged. You're not asking to be needed. You're asking to be respected. And that's not too much. If this message feels like it was finally made for you, don't let it fade. Subscribe, hit the bell, like and comment. Your support helps us turn silence into voice. This is The Silent House, and we're just getting started.